The 30th Annual Alaska Native Art Auction, celebrating Indigenous artists and voices, takes place Saturday, March 21st. Corporate sponsorship opportunities are available. Information at kmba.org.
Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. After watching more than $1.5 billion federal dollars for tribal clean energy projects disappear, tribal enterprises are hopeful alternative funding sources might help keep the lights on. Washington State distributed about $1 million each to 17 different tribal clean energy projects. Other states are also starting to see funding bottlenecks clear up. We'll get an update on what money is available and how it's being used. That's all right after the news.
This is National Native News. I'm Antonia Gonzalez. Legal online sports betting in Wisconsin would have to go through in-state tribal computer servers under a bipartisan bill given final okay by the state legislature Tuesday. Chuck Kornbach reports.
Supporters and critics of online sports betting acknowledge it frequently occurs in Wisconsin. Gamblers go through commercial companies like DraftKings. But the Wisconsin Constitution says most legal betting can only occur on sovereign tribal properties here, regulated by state tribal gaming compacts. The just-passed bill by the legislature attempts to reinforce that online sports bets in the state must go through the 11 federally recognized tribes in Wisconsin. Shannon Holsey is president of the Stockbridge-Munsee Band of Mohican Indians. She says the new legislation is good public policy.
It provides clarity, respect to tribal sovereignty, and it strengthens Wisconsin's long-standing state and tribal partnership. And especially for our tribe and all tribes, it really creates opportunity while allowing us to grow responsibly, securely, and on our own terms.
Holsey says any additional revenue for the Stockbridge-Munsee would go toward funding things like tribal housing, health care, and public safety. Remarks opposing the Wisconsin sports betting bill center on what critics say is the possibility of more people becoming addicted to gambling. Steve Nass is a Republican state senator.
Making gambling easier and more accessible online will only accelerate these harms. Family breakdown, lost productivity, addiction treatment.
But other supporters of the sports betting bill say more ways to prevent problem gambling could now be negotiated with the tribes. Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers still has to sign the legislation, and the federal government still has to okay amended gaming compacts. For National Native News, I'm Chuck Kornbach.
Jesse Holmes was the first musher to reach the end of the 1,000-mile trail from Anchorage to Nome, winning his second consecutive Iditarod. As KMBA's Rhonda McBride reports, Indigenous mushers were still out on the trail Wednesday morning.
Pete Kaiser, a Yupik from Bethel, and Ryan Reddington, an Inupiaq from Kinnick, were finishing their mandatory 8-hour rest in White Mountain, one of the last 2 checkpoints in the race. Both former champions were hoping for a repeat, but Kaiser says his team contracted a stomach virus on the trail, so he rested them more to give them time to recover. Kaiser told the Iditarod Insider that this changed his focus.
I've been kind of reminiscing and soaking in the sights more than ever, trying to be in the moment more than stressing out about placement and different things like that. So, of course, it would have been fun to be further up, but that's not always in the cards. And I've had a good trip.
Kaiser's team is positioned to finish in the top 10. He says the cold, dry snow on the Bering Sea coast has been one of the biggest challenges because it sticks to the sled runners. Reddington, who was running not far behind Kaiser, told the Iditarod Insider this last stretch of trail has also tested his team.
Hopefully we get a little less wind, and if it is windy, I'm going to take a lot more rest.
There were also 3 rookie Indigenous mushers in the race. Jesse Terry, an Anishinaabe from Ontario, is in 16th place, and Kevin Hansen, an Inupiaq from Kotzebue, in 21st. Jody Potts-Joseph, a Han Gwich'in from Eagle Village, who had to contend with bison on the trail, pulled out of the race yesterday after her team came down with kennel cough. She said that she had to put her team first. In Anchorage, I'm Rhonda McBride.
And I'm Antonia Gonzalez.
National Native News is produced by Kawanak Broadcast Corporation with funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Support by the Gathering of Nations Powwow. The last dance is this April 24th and 25th at Expo, New Mexico. The Gathering of Nations Traders Market will be in the Creative Arts and Lujan buildings both days. Tickets available at gatheringofnations.com and at the gates.
Support by the American Indian College Fund, providing millions of dollars of scholarships to Native students every year. Applications are accepted through May 31st at collegefund.org or by phone at 800-766-FUND.
Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
This is Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. When the federal government pulled back $1.5 billion, it left a funding void for tribal green energy projects. States, private organizations, nonprofits, and tribes themselves have been working since to fill that void. Washington State just distributed more than $16 million to tribal projects, some of which were on hold due to the loss of federal funding. And we'll hear about a new Native-led company that started in response to the loss of federal funds. It is already working with more than a dozen tribes to keep their renewable energy projects on track. In this hour, we'll talk with those guiding tribes and Native entities through a new reality for funding for green energy initiatives. You can join our conversation as well. What role do solar or wind energy projects play in your community? Is the loss of federal funds making a noticeable difference? Let us know. You can call us at 1-800-996-2848. That number is also 1-800-99-NATIVE. We have 5 guests on the show today. First, joining us from Parker, Arizona is David Harper. He is the CEO of Hurrah Energy. He is Mojave from the Colorado River Indian Tribes. David, good morning and welcome to Native America Calling.
Hey, good morning. Great to be here.
Joining us from Salt Lake City, Utah is Micelle Spotted Elk. She is an Indigenous Affairs reporter for GRIST, and she is Northern Cheyenne and also a citizen of the Navajo Nation. Micelle, good morning. Welcome to NAC.
Thanks for having me.
Joining us from Omak, Washington, we have John Cyrus, Traditional Territories Advisor for the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation and also a member of the tribe. John, good morning to you as well. Great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
In Phoenix, Arizona, we have John Lewis on the line. He is the Managing Director for Native American Energy at Avant Energy, and he is a member of the Gila River Indian community. And I apologize, he's not in Phoenix. He is on Gila River. John, hello. Good morning. Welcome to the show.
Hey, good morning. Thank you for having me.
And our last guest joins us in the Albuquerque studio, Sean Sabotse. He is the head of Tribal Technical Assistance and the project development for the Alliance for Tribal Clean Energy. He is Zuni. Sean, hello. Welcome to the show. Great to have you in the studio.
Thank you very much for having me.
I want to thank all of you for joining us, taking your time today to educate our listeners. And David, I want to begin with you because Hurrah Energy was created in response to the clawback of federal funding that we're talking about today, specifically for tribal green energy. What opportunities does your company see now?
Well, yeah, good morning. Again, my name is Dave Harper. I'm from the Colorado River Indian Tribes, the Mojave Indian. I am the CEO of Hurrah Energy. What we've seen in the last about 4 months, we've seen some of the tribes who are involved in the renewable energy space. They saw that their money was clawed back. And, we work with 80 tribes across the United States, and the most significant tribes had their renewable projects that were in the queue. They got their funding. Some of them got funding. Some of them were waiting for their funding. They were moving to construction. They had done their feasibilities. They talked to the stakeholders, and Everybody was on board. The tribe bought into the vision of their journey, and then the money was taken back. And some of the tribes put in a lot of their own money into these projects, and so the tribe kind of like stopped. And there was so much dependency on the federal government and these monies, and the project was so early stages of development that the tribe didn't have any of their own revenue to keep the project moving. And so I think about 20 of the tribes that we're talking with, they had stopped. And one particular tribe, the Kidiville tribe in Rancheria, they had contractors ready to start building. And when the money stopped, they didn't have any money to pay the contractors, even after they negotiated the contract. So what we did was we thought about it, and we said, there has to be an entity that can create bridge loans for these tribes to keep their projects moving. And so we met with the former LPO person named Jen Lurch, who had been working with the LPO for many years, and she said, we should sit down and draft out something for the tribes that they can have some assistance to keep their projects moving. So she helped us develop Harav Energy. And when we went to the Giddyville Rancheria, we were able to negotiate $1 million bridge loan to the tribe to keep their project moving. So they're now been able to keep that project going. We do have several other tribes in the queue right now. Our bridge loans range between $1 to $10 million. And so what we created was a kind of like a weave of industry. We partnered with several CDFIs such as OWISTA and Mission Driven Finance for us to sit down as an entities to create the bridge loans for these tribes to keep their projects moving. And so the bridge loans are low interest. They're low interest loans with a quick turnaround payback of 1 to 4 years. So it's not going to be an endless amount, but what we're doing is we're creating the bridge loan, and then we're creating a loan after that. So say the tribe wants to have a bigger loan of 20 to 50 million, we'll be able to facilitate that if the tribe wishes that.
Okay. And David, the source of capital for these $1 to $10 million bridge loans and also these follow-up loans that you're going to be able to offer, is that coming primarily from these CDFI partners?
It's what we call the capital stacking. So each entity could be a provider to one project. So say, for instance, we didn't want to use up all our resource from, like, say, OWISTA, use all the resources on the one tribe. We said, well, let's do this. Let's do a weave. So the weave is OWISTA may give $2 million, Mission Driven may give $2 million, Harav may give $1 million. And so we create the $5 million capital stack. And so that way there's continuous amount of other monies available for other tribes.
Okay, that sounds really creative. Now, a lot of folks listening to the show right now might be thinking to themselves, well, the federal government is now clearly prioritizing legacy energy sources, petroleum, gas, even coal. Why continue now in the direction that the federal governments are sidelining?
Well, some of the tribes are pivoting. What happened was that, I was in Washington, D.C. last week talking with the Department of Energy people, and what they were saying was the language has to change and the facilities have to change. The projects have to change. We're no longer supporting wind or solar. So a lot of the tribes are now pivoting to maybe having geothermal, right? Maybe some of the projects have kind of altered a little bit for their projects so that they are able to be funded through the Department of Energy and or other sources of income. The big picture is, how does the tribe pivot? Well, there's several things that the tribe has to do. They have to pivot in their mindset of the dependency, away from the dependency of the government. So now the tribe has to look at, how do we enter the bank system, the other financial entities, and how do we get our credit rating? How do we make sure that we can compete and understand the financing? So Harav Energy has developed a Finance 101. We just had on Monday where we had 45 tribes on learning about financing and the tax credits on projects. So one of the criteria for us is that if you come to us and we give you a bridge loan, you have to take that Finance 101 so you can understand what your what finances you're getting your tribe into, but also that you're able to tell the story to your stakeholders of why you went for this bridge loan, what's the impact, and what is the positiveness of this entity of getting the financing.
And David, what about long term? This sounds really promising, these bridge loans as you describe them, and the follow-up loans as well. But in the absence of federal funding, how healthy will the tribal clean energy industry remain if it's left to just fend for itself in some of these alternative financing methods that you're talking about today?
Well, that's we can't be a victim, right? Our mentality is we can't be a victim. We can't be the poor Indians. Oh, poor Indians, this what happened to us. We have to pivot to being the guys on the block that are being progressive, that are moving. And so part of that is understanding the concept and idea of financing. We have to learn what healthy financing is. And so I know in the tribal world, a lot of the tribal people say, well, if you get a loan, what's going to happen to my per cap, right? Or what's going to happen to the services that we get? Are you taking that from us? So there has to be an understanding of financing, of healthy financing, and not, I know we have historical trauma from the past, people who fiended on the tribes, who created these loans that where the tribes were stuck with, and they were in debt for X amount of years. So that's why the 101 is so important, is teaching the tribe what is a healthy finance perspective, and how can you finance to where you have sustainability. Maybe there's a partner. Maybe you have a partner, but you still own 51%. Maybe you don't have a partner. You do your own development. You get your own financing available. You have to look at all the options available, and that's what our financing does.
David Harper kicking off our conversation today. He is the CEO of Hurav Energy, and he's saying we can't be victims. As Native people, we've got to go out there and we've got to make this happen, and we've got to be creative, and we have to become business savvy and understand the finance of what it takes to fund some of these clean energy projects. And I think his message is probably going to resonate with a lot of listeners today. It's inspiring to hear him talk. So we're going to take a short break. We'll come back. We have other guests on the show as well, and we're going to unpack this issue here with regard to what it's going to take to keep tribal green energy projects at work throughout Indian country. The phone lines, as always, are open for listeners who would like to join the conversation. Maybe you have some thoughts with regard to tribal green energy initiatives. Maybe you have something going on in your own community that you can talk about with regard to green energy. Or maybe you're just someone who's interested in what the possibilities are, what the potential is for tribes to embark on green energy programs, what it might mean for community members. You living in your home, driving to work every day, what does that look like with green energy at your disposal? Give us a call. I want to hear from some listeners. 1-800-99-NATIVE. As the Islamic holy month of Ramadan comes to a close, we'll hear about the rare intersection of Islam and Native Americans. Some Native people have found strength and comfort in Islam and even incorporate their Native traditions within the faith. We'll hear more about it on the next Native America Calling.
Support from Davis Keelan Law Firm, a New Mexico firm standing with Native families suffering catastrophic loss. When tragedy strikes Indian country, we fight to restore stability, dignity, and justice. Bringing a voice to Native families and communities for 20 years. More information, daviskeelan.com.
Thank you for joining us today on Native America Calling. We're talking about tribal green energy. Tribes and Native companies say they can't rely on federal funding anymore, and they're looking to other sources of support to keep momentum going and to finish work they've already started. Is your community in that situation? You can let us know by calling 1-800-996-2848. Our next guest, John Lewis, is the Managing Director for Native American Energy at Avant Energy. He joins us now from Gila River, Arizona. And John, I'm going to ask you a similar question to what I asked David Harper earlier. To what extent do tribes need this federal funding to start and maintain these energy projects?
Good morning. So I've been doing this for almost 20 years, working with tribes on energy issues, not just green energy issues or sustainable energy or renewable energy technology. I have focused a lot on solar, but energy is a very large kind of word that encompasses a lot for tribes. And so I've definitely worked with federally funded grants on behalf of tribes and completed those work over the last 20 years, worked with state-funded grants that have helped tribes out. But it really comes down to the motivations of the tribe. And they really have to understand that energy is important. It's important to our tribal member households. Many tribal communities have head of households who are elders. And so there's a cost issue. We have a lot of reliability issues throughout Indian country. Rural communities, especially tribes, are usually at the end of circuits. So they are the first to, be off during an outage and the last to be reconnected and restored power. So there's a lot of issues and trying to figure this out. I think federal funding is great and it's important when it's there, but I've never really worked on a project that kind of hinged on federal funding or other outside funding. It's always been kind of conventional banking and financing. And anybody who's worked in solar in the last 20 years, they would understand what we're going through right now is yet another hiccup, because there's always an attack on solar. There's always an attack on renewable energy from a lot of different, special lobbying groups and whatnot. So if you've been part of this ride over the last 20 years, you understand that the tax credits that help drive a lot of these projects and those are always at risk, and they're always at risk for, will they be re-extended? Will they expire and sunset? What does that do to future projects? What we're going through right now with this current administration is definitely a lot different. It's a lot more pointed, and there is a lot that has been at risk. But in my experience, we have not really hinged a lot of our projects on federal funding. So, what tribes really need to do, I think what's really important to bring up during this conversation today is that we need to fundamentally think and fundamentally and foundationally rethink how we view energy. And that's not just the generation part where we create energy, whether it's at a natural gas plant or a solar plant or a wind farm. We need to understand where this energy is coming from and how it gets to our tribal government facilities, our tribal public safety facilities, our casinos and hotels that make us money, and then ultimately our tribal member households. We need to understand that. And so trying to figure out how to get some of these projects off the ground, that's very important. And I think all the callers on this call they understand that there's definitely projects that are in motion, and we need to help those projects move forward. But that's just a partial solution. So it's hard for me to understand where in many tribal communities that one solar project is going to make a massive difference. There are still distribution lines that tribes typically, unless you have your own utility, they don't control their distribution assets. So how they get that electricity to households and buildings and facilities, that is crucial. How that power even gets to the distribution system is through transmission, and many tribes don't own their own transmission systems. So again, all this is important, and I think it's very this is unfortunately an interesting time to have this conversation. But I think the bigger issue is not just what's happening with federal funding and with regard to will it be available or will it not be available. I think we really as tribes, tribal governments, tribal enterprises, tribal decision makers and leaders, we have to have some deeper conversations about what energy means, about what our responsibility is, and how we view it. Because quite honestly, we really are moving into this next phase of not being dependent upon federal programs, again, that they may or may not be there, we need to have a more secure financing resource. And so there is conventional banking that's available. There's a lot of different places we can look to help keep these going, because energy projects last for decades. This is not a one-time thing. These things, the planning horizon is decades.
John, this is interesting, and you're explaining the need to rethink and understand how our energy is facilitated, where it comes from, what types of systems it has to pass through in order to reach our communities. It's really eye-opening to hear you talk. But again, going back to the issue of funding, and obviously the federal funding, as you described, was never all that secure to begin with. But now you work with tribes in Washington that have received new state funding. Tell us about this opportunity and how far that money goes towards making up some of the shortfalls that many tribes are experiencing right now with regard to their projects.
Yeah, I think that's really important. So Washington State, obviously, they are a progressive state, and the Washington Department of Commerce had a lot of funding available to help tribes really position themselves strategically to take advantage of some of these existing tax credits and different technologies that really need to be looked at to give them more energy independence and energy security. That's the name of the game, energy security. Tribes need to have secure, reliable, affordable energy resources that they can control. And then usually that means on their tribal lands. So Washington Department of Commerce, I work with the Colville tribes, Confederated Colville tribes, and they were a recipient of Washington Department of Commerce funding for a very large study. So this is $1.3 million. We finished it last year I believe in August. And so this was a lot of different segments, but particularly looking at renewable technologies that could work for the tribe in their situation, and also looking at switching over to EV fleet, so electrification for their vehicles that the tribe owns, and then also understanding the multiple utilities, their infrastructure, their transmission lines, their distribution lines, their substations, all those things, how those can be. We have to rethink of possibly maybe we should take on ownership of some of those things, build our own for the tribe. The tribe needs to maybe build their own assets, but really a strategic document. So this is $1.3 million that Washington Department of Commerce provided to Colville. And I've been doing this for 20 years. This is probably the single biggest state-funded project, the most comprehensive project I've ever seen done for a tribe. So I think this is a good partnership. I think the states that really need to work with tribes and fill that gap where the feds were not, they're not available right now. They have no interest. Quite honestly, it doesn't seem they have a lot of interest in working with tribes to meet our reliability issues and our affordability issues.
All right. Thank you, John. 1-800-99-NATIVE for anyone who would like to join the conversation, share your thoughts with regard to tribal clean energy projects, maybe in your community or a community that you're familiar with. Myself, Spotted Elk, is an Indigenous Affairs reporter for GRIST, and she joins us now from Salt Lake City, Utah. And myself, I want to go back to the tax bill that passed last year, and that was what actually caused their rescission of $1.5 billion from tribal green energy projects. And I'd like to hear, with the tribes you're familiar with and the reporting you've done, what's been the response to keep projects afloat?
Hi, glad to be here. So when we're talking about President Trump's tax bill that was passed in late July, known as the One Beautiful Bill Act, they yanked around $1.5 billion of federal funding, and this number is what was cited in the recent Brookings report that recently someone came on here to discuss. So some of these programs, like Solar for All, were relied on by many tribes and tribal entities to support investments in Indian country through clean energy or green energy projects. And we ran some numbers and from Brookings, and about 1,600 projects by tribes and tribal entities lost some or all of their federal funding. And I think John makes a good point about whether or not this was a meaningful impact. And I think that 1,600 projects of having either, experiencing roadblocks or completely having to change gears is, I think, a pretty salient point that I wanted to point out in my reporting. One interesting point, though, I wanted to highlight was discussing whether or not the Inflation Reduction Act that provided this $1.5 million was enough to support the demand needed to improve tribal energy infrastructure in Indian country. And I think when I was speaking with Robert Maxima Brookings, I think when we think about stuff like adequate energy, a clean environment, and ability to, invest in energy infrastructure in Indian country without, pollution or environmental degradation, these are sort of points that are key to the trust and tribal treaty relationship, right? And I think in general, when we think about overall what is energy like in Indian country, we have like a DOE report that says that tribal households face an energy burden 28% higher than the national average. In the Southwest, the Hopi tribe and Navajo Nation have one of the highest rates of unelectrified homes relying on coal, propane for heating, right? And I think that when we look at right now the current landscape, we have, philanthropic bridge funding, and we have, some of the tribes that are looking to, have some funding support, such as Hurav, which, David Harper is CEO of. And then we have, really big players such as the Alliance for Tribal Clean Energy, have recalibrated their strategies, but their mission and impact continue to be the same. I think we, for the financial landscape, we're thinking about how, for the first time, when doing my reporting, a sustainable investor report for who don't really have experience managing or overseeing, funding for projects in the Indian country. There was a report last fall from the Sustainable Investment Forum that, published this kind of guide for these investors to sort of learn how to navigate Indian country. I also want to talk about that, yes, there are now federal opportunities for geothermal, updating transmission lines, and even agrivoltaics, which is where food grows under solar panels. There's opportunities for technical or funding assistance on these. And so some of the tribes, like Harper mentioned, this is where they are, for the first time, sort of looking to that while the current administration is prioritizing, legacy, energy, and other kind of initiatives. I know that. Okay. Thank you.
Marcel, we heard John talk earlier about the $16 million for tribes that the state of Washington came up with. Do you get a sense that other states might invest in tribal green energy as well?
I think when we think about sort of what does energy futures look like in these states that also have underwent federal funding clawbacks, there will definitely be an investment in from states such as Washington and who are more progressive. I think it's a really good question. I don't want to say for sure what that direction looks like, but I do see that a lot of states are rethinking what is sort of the future of renewables, what is the future of energy, especially during, the booming data center development. How do you kind of navigate the sort of challenges and what does that kind of look like for funding? And I do think that while they're also grappling with their own, unique federal clawbacks with clean energy funding, I do think that tribes who are in that state, I think will definitely be at the conversation table.
Marcel, what about tribes that just can't make it work now without the federal funding? Have you come across any projects that just have been terminated because, look, we just can't make this work? Or even with some of these alternative investors like what Hurav is proposing or some of these other possible funding sources, we're so dependent on that federal funding, we're just going to have to stop. We're going to have to pivot, maybe just release all these projects and maybe think about it going back to legacy energy. I don't know. What's the response?
So one thing that is clear from talking to sources who are familiar with this is that we are not seeing tribes pivot to oil and gas. I know that the current administration has been, a huge advocate towards, developers and energy to sort of look towards that type of development. But I do see that for projects that have been affected, I don't want to say any particular tribe, or, I'm not too familiar with sort of the complex situations that tribes have who have experienced cut or loss of all funding. But I do see that, as was mentioned here, that there is sort of changes, or at least a consideration of what does energy right now look like for them. And I know that solar and, other renewable projects were sort of an opportunity to think about what does their own unique energy future look like to them, and that looked like solar, right? And so I think in the meantime, as I mentioned, updating transmission lines is a program that the DOE recently announced, and that's something that tribes are looking to as a way to basically improve their infrastructure. And I think there is really the heart of what does sort of each tribe and tribal nation's energy future look like, and how do you kind of navigate that when sort of the landscape and financial landscape for that look a little blurry and unclear? I would say that there are some roadblocks. I think there are some challenges, but I do think that in the long term, once they kind of find their sort of ground to move forward with their energy futures. It might not look like solar, it might not look like wind, but I do think that what is most important is having a continuous, sustainable, reliable energy infrastructure. And I think that that's kind of key, and a key problem in Indian country.
All right. Thank you, Marcel. This show really gets you thinking about the energy that you use. When you turn on that light switch, or you turn up the thermostat to heat your home, or maybe turn it down, where does energy come from? And how many different systems does it have to travel through? And to what extent does your tribe or your community actually have control or ownership of those different systems of infrastructure? Something to think about. 1-800-996-2848 is the number to call to join this conversation. And we're going to take another short break. We'll come back and we'll talk with John Cyrus of the Colville Reservation. And his tribe received some of the money we were talking about earlier from Washington State for an electric boat project. And he will bring us up to date on that. So stay with us. We'll be right back.
Tribal Development Partners believe strong infrastructure strengthens tribal sovereignty. Through the 105L lease program, TDP helps align federal funding systems with long-term tribal priorities. More at tribaldevpartners.com. Proud to support this show.
Need help identifying community priorities? Kaufman & Associates' approach to evaluation is rooted in Indigenous knowledge, honoring tribal history, and sovereignty. More at kaufmaninc.com, KAUFFMANINC.com.
We're glad you're with us today on Native America Calling. Let's continue our conversation on the future of tribal green energy. Without the same support from the federal government, tribes are looking elsewhere for funds to invest in green energy projects and initiatives. And our next guest, John Cyrus, is a traditional territories advisor for the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation. He joins us now from Omak, Washington. And John, Colville Tribes just got a nice amount of money from the Washington Department of Commerce for an electric boat project. Tell us about it.
Yes, we did. We were very fortunate to receive that grant from the Department of Commerce. It's an electric boat. It's a special grant program that they developed through Department of Commerce to help bring forward some renewable and energy efficient abilities for tribes in transitioning away from fossil fuels. I think we've seen quite the effort of Washington State in the leadership and in the legislature as well to support these kinds of efforts going forward. I guess if I can back up a little bit just to put our boat into context. So I worked in renewables for my tribe here at the Colville Tribes back about 20 years ago. So I remember working with John Lewis on some things. And, we developed wind projects, we developed solar projects, we developed, woody biomass cogen plants. And, we were supported through some federal funds, federal grants that helped support some of those studies. And it's a recurring thing that federal funding is not secure. Like it can always be drawn back. So we've always had to kind of rely on those opening and shutting of those doors of funds to support our projects. And part of those early days, we worked on developing a tribal utility. So it's so cool to hear, John Lewis talk about the study that was done to really look at microgrid development and renewables and how we implement those things. And there's a lot of learned lessons from those early 2000s work in developing renewable energies. This electric boat grant is one aspect of what the Department of Commerce did. They also executed an MOU with the Cabo Confederated Tribes to look at a three-tiered kind of approach to developing a partnership with us. Tribal coordination, informal consultation, and formal government-to-government work. So that's a real important lesson, I think, for other states and other communities. They have that. They're bringing forward that real opportunity to make sure they consult with tribes and what do tribes need, what are your goals as a tribe, and how do you reach those. And so it's really just interesting to hear, that effort within the state to bring forward partnerships, but also respecting tribal sovereignty, which is really remarkable.
John, I've got another question for you. Then we're going to move on to our next guest. But green energy projects in your area, they haven't been taking off as smoothly as folks might think. How has the momentum to start green energy projects had a negative effect on tribes and tribal consultation?
Really good question. So along with some of our earlier work, we had a couple wind farms that we were looking at on the reservation. We decided against those because some of these mountains that had the best wind resource were also cultural sites, spiritual sites for our people. So we decided against it. Some of the efforts that are going on within Washington State, while there's a real drive to push these projects, with state support to get them done, in light of some of the current administration's resistance to green energy, we see them blow past some of the cultural resource concerns, some of those traditional root digging grounds that we have. So while we take on these green energy projects, we still have to make sure that we're being aware of what are some of the cultural concerns for our traditional foods, sacred places. It's so important to make sure that while we move to transition away from those fossil fuels, because that is the future. The future is solar and wind, but we have to do it in a responsible way and with that tribal voice, that tribal sovereignty respected. So it's really important in all of our traditional areas, and that's kind of what I'm charged with by the council, to look at what's going on in where our tribes come from along the Columbia River down into Oregon as well. How are those green energies projects being implemented? How are we preserving and protecting those first foods and other sacred sites in those areas? So that's really important.
All right. Thank you, John. Let's hear now from Sean Sabatse, who joins us in the Albuquerque studio. He's head of Tribal Technical Assistance and Project Development for the Alliance for Tribal Clean Energy. And Sean, you represent another Native organization that has recently mobilized. What is the plan to keep this sector going for tribes?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I like to just kind of point out that the Alliance was founded in 2016. So it's been around for some time with other names, and it's important to note that we are a 100% philanthropically funded organization. So every service and all our support comes at no cost to tribes. And so we offer technical assistance, funding, and financial advising. We have a very active policy shop, and we are actively doing education and workforce development to support tribal leaders and members. And so we have 3 convenings coming up this year, the Tribal Energy Evolution Summit, and I can share this on at the end with our website, the Tribal Clean Energy Finance Forum, held in conjunction with NAFOA, which is another national organization, and the Tribal Energy Symposium at RE Plus in partnership with the Solar Energy Industry Association and Smart Electric Power Alliance. And so what we are doing as the Alliance is we are helping tribes pivot after the funding has been clawed back. Our grants department has done an excellent job writing grants to secure over $490 million, close to $1 billion for tribes, 75 plus tribes that have applied. And after the clawback, our technical assistance team has then helped to scope out an appropriately sized project with the funding available. So our department within the Alliance, we basically assess what the current energy infrastructures and usage patterns are to then uncover opportunities for a much smaller project. For example, if there's a microgrid that was designed, we'd first take a look at what are the biggest consumers in the community and how can we do it with the current funding available. And, with the Alliance, since we're philanthropically supported, there are donors that have provided us funding to redeploy into tribal communities. With the foresight of our leader, Sherry Smith, who's a direct descendant of the Mi'kmaq Nation up in Maine, she has, had the foresight to start a fund called the Indigenous Power and Light Fund. And that was started to provide the gap funding for when those federal dollars would have come in, and which require matches, by the way. And sometimes these tribes that apply for grants don't always have the matching component. And that was the strategy that started the Indigenous Power and Light Fund. But after the clawback and the fundings that have been taken, we then have just tried to stretch the dollar. And in the last year, the fund has deployed over $3 million across many tribes across the lower 48, Alaska and Hawaii. And so we are currently in a position to review an additional 25 applications. We just recently awarded 7 tribes with over $1 million of grants that would enable these community scale projects, and then to keep the utility scale projects on track with the pre-development work. Just as John mentioned, there's a long road to doing large utility scale, but our focus has really been around the local consumption to bring awareness to, offsetting their carbon footprint at the local point of use. Most people don't know where their energy comes from. It's often generated with fossil fuels, and so by bringing these local projects to the forefront, they're able to understand where energy comes from at that point. And there are really interesting ways that we can elevate the awareness by providing data in real time with production of their energy systems. And so that's really what we're doing to keep a lot of these projects moving forward. And so with the Indigenous Power and Light Fund, there are basically 3 types of capital deployments, which number one is a direct grant for communities where energy poverty is most acute, and then a recoverable grant, which is the flow back of funds once a project secures permanent financing. And with this type of fund, there's really no interest. It's like a loan, but it's a recoverable grant. And I'll share a little bit about a grant that we made in Alaska with Quaganok, and they have a sister village in Alaska, Koganok. Both communities were severely impacted by the tsunami Halong, and it basically devastated the whole community. And that's due to climate change. But our fund had been applied to repower one of their wind generating systems. And so it was a long track to get that project funded. And unfortunately, with the tsunami impact to the village, it was understandable that they wouldn't have been able to fulfill their commitments to provide the recoverable grant. And so in that case, it was forgiven. And so we're in a position to be able to make those kinds of decisions with the philanthropic dollars that we have available. And of course, for the much larger projects that are, years in development. We have development loans that are structured in ways that are more patient than what commercial lender or even in some cases CDFIs might be looking for. And so, but we do tie repayments to project milestones and not arbitrary deadlines. And the goal is always to meet tribes where they are.
Okay. And Sean, these donors that you describe in these grant-making organizations, what's their motivation for investing in tribal clean energy?
Well, ultimately, I think the donors are motivated, number one, to save the planet. Tribes have always been stewards of the land, and so that naturally aligns. But really, it's also to provide access to capital where it's traditionally unavailable, and it's really to address like severe poverty, suffering, widespread unemployment, and in ways to reduce addiction, disease, early death, and then to also reduce the extractive nature of fossil fuel development. And so there's a lot of different channels that come into our organizations to help the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Ultimately, that's what's causing climate change. And each donor has, in some cases, their own initiatives, but in a lot of cases, they just want to see the world a better place. And as Indigenous people, like myself, I always say that I want to always live lightly on this earth, just as our ancestors did. Mm-hmm. And it's really, for me, I see myself as a spiritual calling, that I'm calling to, serve my people. And we want to live lightly on this earth, just as our ancestors did, and provide an equitable opportunity for our members who aren't urban like I am. so that's
me
really
as
it.
Well.
Yeah. So yeah, but that's really the key for our donors, is to bring capital access.
Okay. Sean, we've got a couple of minutes before we have to wrap up this conversation, but are there any other forms of energy development that you think tribes should be looking at? It just seems like there's so much more than ever before. Every day there's some new disruptive technology, or there's research on some new form of energy or potentially energy. Anything we need to be thinking about before we wrap up this show that could be an opportunity for tribes moving forward?
Well, absolutely. In this current administration, there's a push to increase, geothermal energy development, which was mentioned earlier, and to pair that with a huge growing need for energy, an insatiable appetite for AI and data centers. And the Alliance does not take a position for or against the siting of data centers in Indian country. And each tribe is a sovereign nation, and it has the inherent right to make decisions about economic development on their lands. And so it's not our place to endorse or oppose those decisions, but where the Alliance can play is to help guide those discussions to understand the full impact. And we are always looking at new development of energy development. So we are currently engaged in active research on this topic around data center development. The Alliance will soon release a white paper examining the key considerations for data centers in Indian country, which we hope to provide as a useful resource for tribes and their partners as they navigate these opportunities. But ultimately, we do attempt to provide education, and if I may, we do have 3 conferences coming up. On April 29th, we have the 2nd Annual Tribal Clean Energy Finance Forum, which is paired with NFOA in Reno, Nevada. And then we have the 4th Annual Tribal Energy Evolution Summit, May 11th through the 14th at Tulalip in Washington. And then we have the 4th Annual Tribal Clean Energy Symposium at RE+, and that is in Las Vegas. So these are opportunities where you can hear directly from the best-in-class experts in our area. And so if you would like more info, then you can visit our website, tribalcleanenergy.org.
All right. And with that, we're going to have to wrap up this conversation, but I do want to thank our 5 guests who joined us today: Sean Sabotse, myself, Spotted Elk, David Harper, John Lewis, and John Cyrus. Join us again tomorrow. We'll have a conversation about the end of Ramadan with Native Americans who follow Islam. I'm Sean Spruce. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Hear that? That's everything tribal college faculty do for their students on Fast Forward. Because if one tried to say it in real time, they'd be here all day. They teach, guide, comfort, and connect. And for that, the community is grateful. Learn more at mostthoroughdjobdescription.com. The American Indian College Fund supports this program.
They give extensions, cheer progress, share laughter, create calm, and allow reflection. They inspire hope, share wisdom, guide gently, validate healing.
Attention tribal community leaders. The 2026 Tribal Self-Governance Conference takes place this April 7th to the 9th at the Gila River Wild Horse Pass Resort and Casino in Chandler, Arizona. Tribal delegation meetings using AI, Indian Health 101, land stewardship, tribal values-based communications training, understanding the tribal-federal relationship, and more, all at one convening. The full draft agenda and registration are available at tribalselfgov.org, who support this show.
Native America Calling is produced in the Annenberg National Native Voice Studios in Albuquerque, New Mexico by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation, a Native nonprofit media organization. Funding is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting with support from the Public Radio Satellite Service. Music is by Brent Michael Davids. Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.